Hey guys, Patrick Coker out here once again talking to folks about the 10 Commandments, doing some serious investigations. Let's talk about coveting.
Okay.
Have you ever coveted?
Yes.
What? You don't have to answer that. So what are your thoughts? Why is it wrong to want what someone else has?
Because we weren't given it. I mean, God didn't choose for it to be ours, so why should we decide it's not in our plan?
You know what it means to covet? Covet just means wanting what someone else has. Do you feel like that's wrong?
I don't think it's wrong. I think it's honestly pretty involuntary to want what someone else wants. Envy is a really regular feeling to have. I think it's how you act with it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, when they feel envious, they turn it into tearing down others because of their envy. But I don't think it's bad to have envy. I think it's bad if you react in a bad way.
Okay, there's one called covet, and so basically that means wanting what someone else has. Have you ever had that feeling before?
Oh yeah, definitely. Rich people, you see it all over social media. I would love to have that lifestyle, but it's not anything that I could probably have in this life and being realistic.
Let's talk Instagram and the TikToks and the Facebooks and the Twitters. Okay, let's talk about social media. Do you feel like people putting these images out there make it hard for you to be content with what you have and not want what others have?
Yes, yeah, because it's very easy to be I have this, I'm happy with it, but then when I see someone else having it, it's easy to say, well, if I had it, I would be happier.
My grandmother always said comparison is the thief of joy, and I think that is very much true. You see the best of what people put out there, and when you're looking at somebody's seemingly perfect life while your child is in the middle of having a tantrum in the living room floor, you can certainly let that bring you down as a parent.
I do feel that social media has that effect on people because, even the way I dress, I'm I look at social media and I see that and I'm wow, I want to be like that, or I want to look cool like that, or I want to be able to dress that certain way or feel this certain way. I think it's negative. I really don't like how that social media affects it, but it does without you really knowing.
All right, how we doing this morning? All right, if I haven't met you yet, my name is Jake. Good to be with you this morning. A couple things before we get into it. We saw someone get baptized again, so man, praise Jesus for that. And then another quick shout out. I want to give a shout out to our communications team who has been putting together videos for us each and every single week for the last 3 months for this sermon series. So let's just, thank our communications team for that. And if you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 21. And we are on our final commandment. This is our final sermon for the series. So pour one out. We did it, y'all. I believed in us. Before we look at the commandment this morning, I just want to briefly recap where we've been so far and even give some background to the book of Deuteronomy, which we've been looking at for the last 3 months. The book of Deuteronomy, in a lot of ways, is Moses' farewell sermon to his people. He's been pastoring them out in the desert for some 40 years at this point, and he's led them by the hand of God. He's led them out of slavery, out of Egypt, led them through the Red Sea. He saw Pharaoh and all his army get defeated there, and then they're wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. And when the book of Deuteronomy, when Moses' farewell sermon is given, they are on the cusp of the promised land. They're about to cross into the promised land that they've been looking forward to for the last 4 decades. And Deuteronomy, in a lot of ways, is Moses' farewell sermon, the last charge he gives them before they cross the promised land. And all throughout the book of Deuteronomy is Moses saying, choose life and choose God and understand that he is for your good, that in him there is life and life to the fullest. And so with every commandment we've been looking at, we've been examining how each commandment is more than just a rule, but underneath it is a call to follow God, the God who loves us, the God who is for us, the God who provides for us and gives us life. So with that, let's look at this final commandment, Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 21. I'm reading out of the NIV version this time. It says this, that you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So right out that gate, that word covet, I know that's a word we don't normally use a lot. So I found this author, Melissa Kruger, who says this that I found helpful. She says, covetousness is the inordinate or culpable desire to possess often that which belongs to another. And this commandment, just like all the other commandments, assumes that we as sinful human beings have this tendency to want things that isn't ours to have, to covet. And in this commandment, it lists specifically your neighbor's wife, your ox, your donkey. And so I don't know about you. I don't know most of your lives. My guess is you're not coveting your neighbor's donkey. If so, sermon time over, you can leave now and go repent of that, of coveting your neighbor's donkey. But just in case, I modernized this a bit for us. I call this the Jake Standard version of this commandment. Let's go ahead and read it. It says, "You shall not covet what you see on TV or what your friend has on social media. You shall not desire their season of life or their relationship status or how well their kids seem to be doing, nor their new house, nor their latest iPhone, nor your friend's new job in a new city." There you go, the JSV, Jake Standard version right there, coming out next year. I'm kidding, in case anyone is a joke. But all that to say, verse 21 actually does give us some categories, some ways in which we can covet. So check this out. The commandment says, don't covet your neighbor's wife. So there's this sense of like relationship. We could covet someone else's relationship. The next command is not to covet your neighbor's house or land. So there's this idea of coveting their house or where they live, the city they live in. Don't covet his male or female servants, ox or donkey. That's relating to their work, their productivity. So in a sense, it's saying don't covet their job or their wealth or their status. And then the last one, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So there's this sense of material goods. These are different categories this commandment is giving us for ways in which we can covet. And we tend to often lump it towards the last one of material goods. Don't covet material goods. Certainly true. That's certainly a part of it. But as you can see, there are sort of other categories and ways in which we can covet. And when you think about that, there's a lot that we could be coveting here. And the call for us as people of God is to be so caught up in who God is and what he has done for us, to see that he is an abundant provider who loves for us so much that whatever the season of life you are in, our call is to see that God loves us, he's for our good, and he has us where he has us for a reason. But at the heart of coveting says, yeah, but I want my life to be just a little bit different than what God gave me. And if I could expect some pushback on this seems like a commandment where you ask, yeah, but what's the big deal here? I mean, murder, obviously, that should be one of the 10 commandments, no doubt. I don't want to be murdering. I don't want anyone murdering me, of course. But coveting, what's the big deal? If I want something, what's the harm in me, saving up my money to get it? Who am I hurting here, really? I'm not harming anyone, so what's the big whoop? Commandment number 10 gives us the clue here. It says right there in verse 21, you shall not set your desire. So it's saying here that coveting is ultimately not an issue about the thing itself per se. It's an issue of desire. So let's talk about that for a second. Think of desire as your inner drive, what moves you and directs you and gets you out of bed in the morning. That human beings, all of us, desire. We are desire-driven creatures. We are motivated by what we want. We are motivated by our desire. And I would argue desire is a good thing when used correctly. So a desire to love your spouse and to love your family, that is a good desire to have. A desire to work hard in the workplace because God calls you to. Yes, that is a good desire to have. The problem becomes when your desires go off the rails, or as Melissa Kruger mentioned in that quote, when it becomes an inordinate desire. This is what happens according to the verse when you set your desire on something that is out of line with what God has for you and wants for you. And the NIV adds that word set, and I think it's really helpful in understanding how desires work. It's the idea of placing too much weight onto something. And I think what's interesting to note is that the scriptures imply here in this verse that we actually have agency over our desires. In a culture, in a world that says, man, your desires are within you and you can't control that and you need to live that out to be fulfilled, to be a fulfilled human being, the scriptures actually say, nuh-uh, you actually have agency over your desires. But the thing is, when our desires get out of hand, our desires sort of devolve into inordinate desires. And in the process, we set ourselves up for some real damage. And for most of Western civilization, there was this understanding that when it came to desires, that it's not always a good thing to always get what you want. That could potentially be really destructive and damaging to yourself and those around you. And so for most of Western civilization, the understanding was desires are good under the right conditions, but not all desires are good all the time. And so you have to curb your desires. You have to deny yourself, give your life away, serve others, practice gratitude. Don't give in to every whim that passes your mind. The thing is, though, within the last 80 years or so, especially in America, this narrative has flipped when it comes to our understanding of desire. That rather than finding the good life through an ethic of cultivating character and virtue and denial of self, the narrative has now become your desires are good. Your desires are who you are. Your desires must be expressed and fulfilled if you want to be a happy human being. And this is everywhere. This is out there. This is in us. This is in me. This idea that my life is not exactly how I want it to be. And so I need to give in to my desires and my wants if I want to actualize as a human being. And not only does it lead to damaging yourself in the long run, but it causes some profound, perpetual disappointment and discontentment in our lives. And the reality is, this narrative that is flipped when it comes to desires did not happen by accident. I'll show you why in just a second, but I would argue that America, perhaps more than any other society ever on our planet, is that we have a system that is actually designed at its very core to make us discontent. So a quick history lesson here. We mentioned this earlier at the beginning of the year, but at the turn of the 20th century, philosopher Sigmund Freud said that we are at our core our desires. And the reason why most of the problems exist in the world is because we've been taught that we should suppress our desires. And that's why you have all the problems that you have. And he argued if you really want to flourish as a human being, if you want society to flourish, we need to give into our desires because they're all good. Fast forward then, some 40 some odd years later, Sigmund Freud's nephew, who went by the name Edward Bernays, comes to America shortly after World War II, and he has this radical idea. He says, what if he took his uncle's theory, Freud's theory about desire, and applies it to selling product? And his theory was people would buy whatever product so long as you appeal to their feelings, their emotions, their desires. And prior to that, advertising was about giving people the facts and the information and appealing to their mind, appealing to their intellect. But then he sort of flipped the script and said, no, don't appeal to their intellect. If you really want them to buy the product, you have to appeal to their emotions and their feelings. And so rather than selling a product by saying, hey, you need this, Bernays shifted the mentality to become, this would make you feel better if you have this. To cite one Wall Street executive at the time, he said this was about some 80 years ago. He says, we must shift America from a needs to a desires culture. People must be trained to desire, to want new things, even before the old has been entirely consumed. We must shape a new mentality in America. Man's desires must overshadow his needs. When I first came across that quote, I was like, oh my gosh, have I been living in the Matrix this whole time? But historically, America became the first society to shape its whole marketing and capitalistic system into one that appeals to inordinate desires. By appealing to our desires that will always outpace what we actually need, in the process, it created a system of unhappiness in our society for the last 80 years or so. It's this idea that in everything, it's this whisper that says, yeah, but your life's not perfect, right? Your life could be just a little bit better, and you want your life to feel better, right? So, go on the next vacation or buy the newest clothes or the latest car because your life would be better if you did. And in the process, it created within us a system, a society of discontentment that says, I'm not happy with what I have, and I'm not happy with where I am. And the system creates within us a resignation and disenchantment that says, is this it? Is this all there is? Surely there's something better. And in the process, we became enslaved and mastered by our desires, not just with products, but over time, over decades and decades, it seeped into every category of life, this feeling of discontentment and envy and unhappiness. And here's how you see this play out on a big macro level. So think about the modern advertising system and how it appeals to our desires. In nearly every billboard you see, there is laden within it some sort of promise that appeals to our feelings. Maybe it's an attractive person on the billboard, or maybe it's a group of people in a restaurant or a city having the time of their lives, or maybe it's a catchy slogan that promises something their product is selling. In nearly every one of those, there's an appeal towards some desire within you, and in the process stokes some level of discontentment. It's this idea that, yeah, your life is fine, but your life could be better. Or sure, where you live is okay, but if you did this or lived here, then you'd really have the life you always wanted, or then you'd have the friends you always wanted. And it often stokes within us coveting, whether we're aware of it or not, because the truth is it's far easier to make money off of our unhappiness than it is to make money off of people that are content and satisfied in life. All the while, which most of us know, all the while, our browsers and our apps are selling our data and history to major corporations so they can tailor advertisements exclusively towards you, all the while tracking your phones and seeing what stores you go to, all the while listening to your phone conversations to give you advertisements specifically tailored to you to inevitably stoke in you some level of discontentment that can only be satisfied when you buy their product. I noticed this just a couple weeks ago. I was talking to Pastor Allen. He has some very cool boots. We were talking about boots. I said, yeah, I could really use some new boots. I like those boots. Tell me about those boots. And then after that, I go back to my office, and maybe 15 minutes later, I pull up Instagram really quick, and the first advertisement is for boots. And I'm like, they're listening to what I'm saying. And the truth is, those boots were really cool. Like, that's the thing where it's getting me. It's like, those are very cool looking boots. But it created within me in that moment discontentment that I did not have before. Or think about social media. Maybe it's not even necessarily selling an advertisement or selling a product, but you'll see generally is a filtered photo of someone whose life seems so put together. You see the mom and dad smiling with their kids, and because we've been manipulated to view life in terms of desire, we see that photo, and implicitly we see that photo, and it has this message of like, man, I really want what they have. They seem all put together, and man, my life isn't that. Meanwhile, what you don't tend to see are like the 6 other attempts to take that photo and all the bribing with the kids that took place to get them to smile in that one photo, hypothetically. But when all you see is a filtered stage photo, it can appeal to your desires and evokes coveting within you. And in the process, we become enslaved to those desires. Or the post of the single 20 or 30-something living it up in a cool location, having the time of their lives. Maybe they're an influencer, or maybe more often than not, they just want to remember the moment. Either way, we've been manipulated to want to have our desires met all the time and to want what we don't have. And when that sets in, it becomes coveting. It's the allure of being discipled by Freud and Bernays. It's this idea of, yeah, but your life could be better, and don't you want to feel special? But here's how you even see this play out on a day-to-day level. Think about this. When we were kids, generally speaking, what was the highlight of birthdays and Christmases? Like, what do we remember most? There we go, gifts. Like, we remember the stuff. I heard gifts, but then I looked at you. Yeah. we remember that is gifts most of the time, the stuff we got. I don't remember a lot of like when I was a little kid, but I have this specific memory when I was 8 years old, Christmas morning, waking up to my Christmas present from Santa was a VHS box set of the Star Wars trilogy. And I'm embarrassed to say this, but I immediately just like dropped to my knees and started bowing down to it. I'm embarrassed to say that. For those of you of a certain age, a VHS is like a DVD, like a plastic. It's crazy. I'll tell you later. Or check this out. Kid commercials on TV. They haven't changed since I was a kid. We were on vacation a couple months ago, and we were in a hotel room, and I was introducing my kids to SpongeBob. And I totally forgot how cable used to work, but for the 30 minutes of programming, there's about 10 minutes worth of nothing but commercials. And we were just watching one toy commercial after another. And my son, who had no idea who G.I. Joe was, all of a sudden is like, I want G.I. Joe. And it's like, dude, you had no idea who that was, but I want it now. It's stoked within him this desire to have it. And while it's silly, the truth is, like, we as adults have not grown out of that mindset. Like, we don't have a Christmas wish list per se, but a lot of us have Amazon wish lists, and we have an annual holiday each year where America watches nothing but commercials for 3 hours straight, and we call it the Super Bowl. I think they do other stuff, but as far as I know, it's just nothing but 3 hours of commercials. I even saw an ad recently trying to sell Amazon Prime, and the tagline said, "Patience is overrated." And I thought, oh, the shock. How dare they say such a thing? And then I went to order a book, and it was going to take 5 days and not 2. And I went, no, but I want it now. Or how about this? This comes from Theodore Roosevelt, who says this. He says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And I think that's just so helpful when it comes to understanding this commandment. There's this subtle sense that when I compare what I have to what others have with whatever that looks like, it's going to inevitably distort my thinking to not be happy with what I have. And it's like I may have been perfectly content and satisfied in my life, but the minute I start comparing my life to someone else, now I have this discontentment. Like I see this in my life sometimes when I talk to friends of mine who are in a different life stage than where I am. And I think, oh, that sounds really nice. I bet you get to do whatever you want, whenever you want. Just like the drop of a hat, you can go to the beach or the lake whenever you want. You can go to the movies whenever you want. That sounds really nice. And in the process, it can create in me, in those moments of comparison, this discontentment. It steals my joy. Or I was talking to someone this week about the sermon, and they said, for me, it's whenever I see someone with a big house or a nice house, and it could be even a friend of mine on social media, and I'm really happy with my house, but then I see theirs and I start comparing and thinking, well, maybe my house isn't so great after all. Or there's this posture of discontentment and disenchantment, which often leads to what's known as the midlife crisis. When you hit your late 30s and 40s, when life begins to slow down, life starts to settle in, and you look back at your life and you wonder, do I like the life I've built? Do I like who I am? I got what I wanted out of life, but am I really happy with what I've built? Or maybe I didn't get what I wanted out of life at all. And there's this sense of longing and questioning. And when that happens, it's really easy for coveting to set in. Or something I read this week, there's now emerged what's known as the quarter life crisis, which affects nearly half of people in their early to mid-20s. They graduate out of college or they get that first job and then they think, okay, so now what? I thought my life was going to look like this, but it doesn't. And am I really happy with my major that I chose? Am I happy with my job? Am I happy with my city? Am I happy with myself? And in the process creates this raging discontentment. And could it be that when it comes to this commandment, we're discipled more in the way of Freud and Bernays than the way of Jesus? Is it any wonder then how some 80 years removed from this shift, America has become what feels like the epicenter of appealing to our desires? We were already a people of desire, but our culture has groomed us to become a people of inordinate desire, A people who believes the next thing, the new thing, the upgraded thing, that's what I need. And that line of thinking has not only infected my need to buy things, but it's carried over now into a perpetual discontentment in near every category. It was, I don't like this thing, so I need the next thing, the new thing, the upgraded thing, or a different thing altogether. And now it's morphed into, I don't like this season of life. I need to move on to the next season of life or something else. Or I don't like my relationship status. I need a new relationship, a different relationship. I need to get out of this relationship. Or I don't like my job, or I don't like my city. So I need a new job. I need a new city. And on the hamster wheel of unhappiness goes. And that's not even to say all those desires, all of them are necessarily all bad. But what I'm saying is when we live in a society that for nearly a century has tailored near everything to appeal to our inordinate desires, what we're typically doing, often without realizing it, is telling God, God, I don't like where you have me. I don't like where you have me. God, you dealt me a really bad hand in life. Now, sometimes these realizations are just a process of grieving. And it's necessary to grieve with God and before God. Sometimes your life isn't all you hope for, and you feel the loss of this unlived life, and it's very difficult and even worthy to grieve well with God and others. Sometimes it's absolutely necessary to do that. And sometimes that grief, when not dealt with in the healthiest of ways, can turn into coveting, where you don't just grieve the desires that weren't fulfilled, but you set your desire on the lives you didn't or have not gotten to live, and it becomes this deep jealousy or bitterness or covetousness within you. This is what happens when we appeal primarily to our desires. It creates an inward resignation that says, is this it? Really? Is this all there is? And this act of setting our desires onto something is at its heart an act of faith. When I set my hopes, my wants, my expectations onto something, whether it be a relationship or a job or a career or a thing or a fill in the blank, I am implicitly making a faith statement that says, if I just have this, then my soul will finally be at rest. But the truth is, anything you place your faith in, that you set your desire on outside of what you were made for, that is God and God alone, it will ultimately leave you feeling devastated because it will never be enough. You will never be fully content. You will always be left feeling dissatisfied in the long run because you will find yourself enslaved by your desires. And what I need and what you need is our desires to be found in something, or rather someone who is big enough to handle what our hearts really desire. And that's what God does for us. And just as we can be manipulated to give in to our desires, so too our desires can be transformed to be realigned back to God and who he is. A God who is big enough to handle all of our discontentment and reshape our hearts to see that in him we have everything we need and more. A God who is gracious enough to handle all of our disappointments and remind us of his always abounding, steadfast love to us. A God who is beautiful enough, who no matter what cards you have been dealt with, to see that he is in control and he is sovereign and he is good. And in him giving us his son, Jesus, we see the objective truth and proof to see how much God loves us and provides for us. That just as death could not hold down the love of Jesus, so there is no desire too great, no want too big that Jesus ultimately can't fulfill through his presence and power in your life. And when you see this and rest in this, it produces in you a radical acceptance, a life of gratitude and joy that says, I have Jesus now. I have Jesus now. The God of the universe is with me. He loves me. He's given me life to the fullest. He's preparing a home for me, and there is nothing better than that. And because Jesus promises to us that he never will leave us or forsake us, that means there is space to go to him with your discontentment. Because Jesus went through every temptation and made himself human, that means there is space to go to him even in your grieving. So your life may not be where you want it to be. Go to him with that. He loves you. Your season of life right now might not be what you signed up for. Take that to the Lord. He is there for you and loves to hear from you in prayer. And when we shift our perspective to be one not of resignation, but of radical acceptance that sees the beauty and provision and joy in Jesus alone, we can be like the psalmist David, who even when he was on the run for his life, when it felt like all security and stability was lost in his life, he was able to pen this from Psalm 16, verse 11. David says this, "You make known to me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and at your right hand are pleasures forevermore." This is one of those verses that if you were to start up a Christian coffee company, this would be a great verse to put on that coffee mug, you know? Like, this is a really good coffee mug verse. Or if you were to gram a picture of you at a coffee shop with an open Bible and a latte, and you don't know what to put in the caption, like, this is a really good caption to have. I'm being silly, obviously. Okay, just so we're clear. But what one friend of mine pointed out to me even this week that I had not really noticed before or taken too much attention of, look what comes right before verse 11, verses 5 and 6. It says this in Psalm 16. It says, "The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance." Notice that connection from verses 5 and 6 to verse 11. That if you want to know the fullness of joy found in God alone, if you want to experience the deep abiding of his presence, it's going to require shifting your heart into a place of radical acceptance and gratitude. To know that God has you where he has you for his greater purposes. And you may not understand it. You might not even necessarily like it. But to shift your gaze upwards and see that God is so utterly gracious to you. And only when you can say the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places, then you are able to say, in your presence, there is fullness of joy. A radical acceptance that says, this is my lot in life. This is where the lines have fallen for me, and I'm going to do everything I can because this is where God has me. So I want to do as much as I can to give glory to God where I am, and I want to honor him where I am so that it might produce in me an even deeper gratitude and thankfulness to him, because when I do, I will experience deeper peace and joy in him. A radical acceptance that says, this is my job, and it may not be the job I signed up for, but this is where God has me. So I'm going to do everything I can to give him the glory and honor him wherever I work. A radical acceptance that says, this is my spouse, this is my family, or this is my singleness, and these are the cards that God has given me. So I'm going to, by the power of the Spirit, to do everything I can to bless others and to give my life away so that I might know the ever-deepening fullness of joy found in God alone. A radical acceptance that says, this is my city, and it may not be where I thought I'd be, but this is where God has me right now. So I want to cultivate contentment here, now, to plant roots, to do everything I can to make my city better, because in the process, when I realize the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places, then I can experience his fullness of joy. A radical acceptance that says, this is my church, this is my people. It's not perfect, and no church is, but this is where God has me. This is where he has me. So I'm going to serve and do whatever I can to give my life away to these people, to make my church, to make this family the healthiest it can possibly be with my God-given strengths and gifts. And I'm not going to complain or covet about a better place because God has called me here. And the more I get into that place of gratitude and contentment, the more I can experience the fullness of God forever. Because here's the thing. If we don't get to a place of radical acceptance found in God alone, we will always be left in a place of disenchantment and discontentment. So I don't know how you need to apply this morning, fighting off coveting, fostering gratitude. In life groups this week, you'll talk about that. But I do just want to offer a few ideas to get the wheels turning for you this week. For you to stop coveting. Maybe it looks like getting off of social media altogether, or maybe it looks like getting off of certain social media accounts that evokes coveting within you. You know which accounts I'm talking about. Maybe it's the super mom that seems to have it all put together. Maybe it's the person in the season of life that you want to be in. Maybe it's the person in the same field you're in, but who seems way more successful than you are. Maybe this looks like parents not getting your kids everything they want for birthdays or Christmas. I know I sound like a monster, but hear me out. I know Christmas is coming up, but maybe, just maybe, to foster in your kids that our joy is not found in stuff we accumulate, that they not get everything they want, even though you could afford it. Maybe if you're tempted to covet money or stuff, to intentionally live below your means, to give your money, to give your stuff away, to open up your home to God's people and God's mission, because God is for you and living a life of radical acceptance is for your good. And this is the refrain throughout all of the 10 commandments, that God is for our good, that underneath every commandment and every rule, there was underneath it a call to embrace this life that God has given you. Embrace this life of love and grace according to how God our Father sees fit. Underneath every law that Moses gave and every command was this plea to choose life and abundance found in God alone. And if you jump ahead to near the very end of the book of Deuteronomy, as Moses begins to wrap up his farewell sermon after pastoring these people for 40 years, as they're about to cross into the promised land, Moses gives them this very final charge before he drops the mic. He says this: I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live loving the Lord your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days. Moses says, which are you going to choose, the path of life or the path of death? And that same call is over us some 3,500 years removed from when this was written for those who follow Jesus. Which are we going to choose? We've been redeemed from a greater exodus, who were rescued from sin and idolatry through the atoning work and resurrection of Jesus. So which will you choose today, the path of life or the path of death? We who were rescued from a greater Pharaoh, we were rescued from Satan and his lies and deceit. So which will you choose, the way of Jesus and the life he brings, or the way of our desires and the death it brings? We've been adopted into a new people, the family of God, the church, today and moment by moment. Which one are we going to choose? So may we today, by the Spirit, choose life and see that God is for our good always.